So thank you, everyone, for joining us here today for Indra's final presentation for her PhD. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wangal and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where I live and work, who are the traditional custodians of the land, waters, and the sky, from where I'm joining you today. I only learned yesterday that Gal in Gadigal refers to the men of the Gadi land, and therefore it's a sexist term. So for the women of Gadi land, they're called Galians. So best to say that I'm joining you from Gadi land rather than Gadigal land. That's something I learned yesterday, and maybe you can take away too. I'd like to add that the Aboriginal sovereignty has never been ceded, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here joining us today, and pay my respects to your elders past and present. Thank you, Indra. I know that you've worked really hard to get to where you are today. So, and I'd like to welcome our panel members. Dr. Baki Kocaballi, who is Indra's co-supervisor from FEIT, and Dr. Gail Kenning, who is also the co-supervisor who's affiliated with FEIT and Design and UNSW, and Dr. Anna-Marie Zelema from the University of Greenwich, who's joining us at 10 p.m. London time. So thank you so much for making the time. I'll hand over to Indra. So Indra, take it away.
Right. Let me share. We didn't practice this, so I hope it goes to the right screen.
I think sharing should work.
Yeah, good. Okay, great. Do you see my slides there?
Yes, thanks, Indra.
Awesome. All right, I'll get started because I have a lot to say, and we might get kicked out at 9:50. So thank you everyone for joining me today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I present to you from, the Dharawal people. And I also respect and acknowledge elders past and present for the role they continue in guiding future generations. So thank you all my friends for joining me. Some friends from across the world that I've met through conferences and everything, some friends from work and some academic friends too. So glad you can join me for my last presentation as a PhD student. I like to call these assessments my PhD birthdays. So this will be my final one. So as you've read from the abstract I've sent you, my thesis right now is titled Co-Experiencing Conversational Voice AI, an ethnographic exploration of individual and collaborative voice assistant culture. So from this presentation today, I hope that you come away with an understanding of how my thesis contributes new knowledge on voice assistance in the field of social AI and human-computer interaction. So since there's a diversity of people in the room today, I've just got some simple definitions that I use. So in academic literature and in the market, the term for chatbot, conversational agent, embodied agent, there's so many different words used, and they do mean slightly different things. But for my research, I use the term voice assistance. This is because I study the out-of-the-box product that is sold by Google, Amazon, and Apple, and I don't make any changes to the product. So I use that term. And you might hear me say the word, the acronym VA, instead of voice assistant. And just some simple definitions in the context of voice assistance. So you might hear me say the word utterance, which is the order of words and the specific words that you would say to your VA device in order for it to respond to you. And that's usually through verbal or a written response. And then down to the bottom, VA skills. This is similar to apps that we use on our phones or computers. We need to open the skill through the voice assistant before we can use it. And lastly, Internet of Things, IoT. This just refers to any technology that has the capability of communicating with each other, other technology through the internet. So what have I been doing for the last couple of years? Well, this all started in 2019 when I wanted to do a research project that would let me collect a bunch of evidence and ask this kind of blue sky question about this phenomenon that had started to pop up. I mean, every time that I talk to someone about my research, there's always some story that they have to tell me. And it'd always be based on some strange, funny experience or something that involved other people. So with voice assistants, I wanted to take a unique perspective that wasn't really studied in the literature. So you'll see that my subsequent research questions focus in on this. So the first one, how do users physically interact with voice assistants? Since it's spoken conversation is the main interface with voice assistants, there's not a lot of work that looks at the whole contextual way that we interact with our body and in spaces with voice assistants. And the second one, how do users interact with other people through voice assistants? This was something that I'd even observed myself, that since it is a spoken interface, anyone could overhear your interactions and potentially join in, or you could have co-interactions. And subsequently, how do people interact with the digital, physical, and social information? So overall, the main research question, which is quite open-ended, how do users construct an understanding of voice assistants, and how does this shape their perception and use of voice assistants? So far to date, I have completed all my field work, which I'll define what I did later. And I have one completed findings and discussions chapter submitted, and which was marked by the panel before this presentation today. And that was around 20,000 words. And I have 2 more work in process drafts of the next 2 findings and discussion chapters. Otherwise, every chapter before that, from introduction to research design, has been submitted to supervisors with some positive response. I've also been sharing my research throughout the years through conferences and already in peer-reviewed journal articles. I am looking to do more work on this next year after I finish writing the bulk of what's left. And I invite all my friends to please leave in the chat any journals or conferences you might think will be appropriate after listening to my work. Okay, so I'm really glad that you're here because it is going to be around 100,000 or 120,000 word thesis, and I'm sure you'll tell me you'll read it, but if not, today we're going to go through chapter by chapter as if you were reading it, and I will pull out some highlights from my findings and discussion that kind of represent each chapter, but of course more detail will be presented in the full thesis and in any papers that I publish in the future. Okay. So I begin with the introduction. Here I introduce the phenomenon of voice assistants, as they are an assemblage of a multitude of different algorithms in one piece of software. Mainly they work on natural language programming algorithm, which takes our spoken audio that it captures, breaks it down and decodes it and sends it to a application programming interface, whether that's to open a skill and connect to it or send you to the browser and search information for you. There's some machine learning that goes on, but these are all proprietary algorithms and systems that belong to different companies. So some of what goes on is not very transparent. And they are IoT devices and commonly used to control other devices in our homes. And of course, they use lots and lots of data, whether that's from all the audio recordings that they capture from us and store, or all the data that they connect us with that's in the internet and their skill libraries and so on. So they are not at this point ChatGPT. And what I mean by that is that they don't use large language models to create any generative AI responses. And even if they are in the future, I still believe that my thesis is really still highly relevant and applicable, because I don't just focus on what the responses are from the voice assistant. I focus on the whole experience of interacting. And as they are designed right now, they do have quite a limited technical infrastructure, where they only have a few microphones and a couple basic speakers, and they are required to be plugged in. So that means that they're quite stationary and stay in one spot. But users generally buy a few to place them around the house to be able to interact from more places. So this is the Weiser-Milgram chart, my variation of it. I've put some new examples in that maps all the different user interfaces that we can design for technologies. So it takes us from the virtual realm, where it's all mostly in an online environment, through to the real realm, where it's in the real environment, in the physical, tangible. And then it takes us from terminal, where the user has to stay still to interact with this interface, through to ubiquitous, where the user can interact from anywhere. And with voice assistants, they sit in this square here, ubiquitous computing, where it's existing in my real world. It's here in my bedroom with me, and I'm interacting mainly in this space. And I can use it at any time. I don't have to be seated or in a specific place to use it. So that's really interesting when it came to study the ways we physically interact with this device. And what also makes it so unique is how person-like these devices are. So there's a common misconception that all the end users are attributing human-like features, anthropomorphizing their devices, but they're specifically designed to be like this. And even if it's just conversational interface, designers are adding more human-like features to play on different characteristics and change the way we interact. So that brings us to the literature review. This is where I look at what research has been done already, and kind of in the scope of where I want to be with my own research. So I break this up by breaking it up into 3 themes. The first, I look at voice assistants as just a technical product and what people are currently using them right now, and how and who is using them right now. The next is voice assistants as person-like. This is describing them with all those human-like characteristics. What has the literature said on that, stuff like trust and vulnerability, and what roles they play. And lastly, voice assistants in community. So this brings us back to that other research question, where I want to focus on other people too. Unlike other technology that we use, like our phones, that's quite private. Like, it's my phone, it's got my password on it. When I'm using it, you can't see my screen. But with voice assistants, anyone can be using it at the same time. So this brings us to how I designed my research to answer these questions and to shape around what I had found in the research, in the literature already. So I looked to 2 theories mostly to guide my research. The first is embodied interaction theory. So these theories just help me understand my data later and help me interpret it and help me design my fieldwork. So as you can read from the theory name, embodied can infer how people use their physical body when interacting, but it also includes the cultural and social significance of the context during our interactions. This book here, Where the Action Is, has been almost my Bible in writing some of my chapters. And I really like this image. I've used it a few times, but it really demonstrates what I mean. Well, we have an airport trolley. It's designed to hold bags, but in the context of being at an airport, coming off a flight, being really tired and nowhere to sit down, you end up using the trolley in a different way. So how are we using voice assistants in a different way? By understanding the context of where we're using them. The next theory is socio-materiality theory. So I use this to distinguish how these households and how companies are shaping how knowledge is produced and organized through the use of these technologies specifically. I always like this example from Kocaballi here about the Google search engine. It's an algorithm that's designed by people. People use the algorithm's changing, it presents different knowledge, and the SEO changes, so on. So at different touch points, you're interacting with different organizations, different social organizations of that technology. So following this, my fieldwork conducted of 2 case studies, and I interweave these case studies in my findings and discussion chapters to thematically analyze the findings. So the first is an auto ethnography of my own experiences. So I've been living with my device for about 4 years throughout my whole PhD. And through this, I've been doing some diary journaling and really reflecting on how I use it and so on. And this complements my other case study with long-term users. So they had to be using it for more than 6 months. I spoke to 10 of them and we did some semi-structured interviews over Zoom, and I got them to demonstrate some of their interactions in front of me, and we also looked at their voice history together. As mentioned, I just do a thematic analysis. So I look at all my findings and with my supervisors too, and we see what's emerging through embodied interaction theory and social materiality theory. Okay, so this is the next chapter, chapter 4. And basically, it's before we dive into the bigger discussion chapters. So first, I talk about how my writing style is. I do talk about my own identity and bias as a researcher and someone who's a participant in my own research. And in my findings chapters, you'll see these kind of large blocks of a short kind of story or point of reflection. These are called vignettes, and they're usually around 100 to 200 words. And they are complementarily interwoven with the transcripts and quotes from my participants. So you see in this slide, I talk about how I present my interview data. So you'll see in a lot of other research that quotes are kind of singled out, and you'll see a sentence that's presented to you. In my thesis, I like to present full conversations, whether that's a few lines from me, like Indra says this, participant said this, Indra said this, participant said this, especially since I'm studying something like conversational AI and studying the context around those conversations. I think it's so important to include this context when presenting my conversations with these other people. So that's what you'll also see in my thesis and how it's written. This chapter also includes just a map of my participants. I had people who had 1 device through to 6 devices, and they had a different combination of households, and they had different backgrounds, ages, and so on. So this thesis does focus more on these devices that you see on the screen here, the out-of-the-box products. And of course, you can interact with voice assistants on your phone, smartwatch, etc. This means they are portable, and this means that it is a bit different from what I described to you in these findings today. Okay, and the last bit of this chapter is just an overview of the key findings from the next couple chapters. This is a simplified version of what that will look like, but you can see here that the 3 chapters have discussed different relationships. So the first, chapter 5, focuses on the environment, people, and their voice assistant. The next 6 talks about people, and their voice assistants. And the last is company, people, voice assistant. So company talking about an imaginary institution that becomes its own entity in itself. Okay, so let's dive in. What's that? 9:20, we're good. So the first one, chapter 5, space, place, and fields in domestic voice-assisted interaction. So this chapter focuses more on that physical interaction that I spoke about, but also cultural and social context in interactions. So I take the term field from a recent Google paper by Gusti et al. Just from last year. It's called, and they introduced the term interaction field. And this is the boundary of interaction that an object or people can have. For voice assistants, this boundary is dictated by the range of their microphones and their speakers. Outside of that, you can't really interact with them. So you can see that this field is visualized in this image with this circle boundary. And you'll see that this intersects with different places and spaces in the home. You can see it going through walls, it kind of like leaves the house, it kind of enters the bathroom. You can hear it from those places. So I take two terms from Dorsch's embodied interaction theory, space and place, where space refers to the organization of an environment. So in a virtual space, it could be like the organization of apps on your screen. But in a real world, it's the organization of furniture, where the walls are, where doors are. And I found that space created some barriers in how people use their voice assistants. For instance, if there was a room or walls, they would have to move and able to interact, or they might want to close their door to block off the space so they felt more comfortable interacting. And then this coincides with place. So place, as you can see from this map, is different areas which have social significance. And this really dictated what people did for interactions in those places. So if they're in the kitchen, they do more kitchen cooking-like interactions. And what also came up in place was different ownership of it. So people were hindered by, they couldn't enter a particular place maybe because it wasn't theirs. So they couldn't use the device in there. So this all came to inform this process that I was able to map of more steps that we actually do in interacting with our devices. And you'll see that a lot of these have to do with field, space, and place, whether it's knowing where all the devices are in the house, thinking about your own personal orientation to a device, the distance towards the device. And even number 8, you'll see evaluate cultural expectations of the environment. Maybe it's nighttime and it's not really a good idea to shout across the house. So that's going to change your interaction. So this just shows that interacting with our devices is more complex than we may have thought. And there's so many more steps we could design for and make better. Okay, moving on to the next chapter. Here I am talking more about the relationships people have with each other and then with their voice assistant. So one of the first things I want to point out is I talk about this intersection or compassionate automation versus automated compassion. I was really inspired to just see if we can reframe the term smart technology to be something about more compassion and care, as this is what I observed from some of my participants, where they wanted to get a device for other people to help them out. They wanted to research skills that would make other people's lives better. They felt they were listened to by the device because the objective listener, or the device was consistently available for them when they were emotionally vulnerable. But also there were opportunities where it limited compassionate relationships, such as automating relationships that people had with other people, or they felt excluded. by the device. For example, not being able to pronounce their names. And in this section, I also mapped different relationships that emerged. And this is all different barriers to how people use their voice assistants. So introducing some social complexity to this technology. So for instance, we have parent-children gatekeeping. We had one parent who would be disabling enabling skills, then they would be telling their children, hey, you can use this, while at the same time trying to negotiate with the other parent what was allowed to be done and what managing the behavior of the kids using the devices. Or co-user dependencies, where I had an example in my interview where one of the participants refused to demonstrate this interaction they were talking about because they weren't the person who did it. Their friend was better at it. So they said, just wait, let me text them, ask what the thing is. So I could see different user types emerging and different relationships here, which is really interesting. And lastly, in this chapter, I kind of take a big global look from inspired by social materiality of how knowledge is transformed and produced from different touch points of from algorithms to the designers, changing things, and from VA users, from interpreting that information and knowledge and sharing it, and then all that coming together again, and then spreading to all the households in the world that use voice assistants. And it shows us that even our most isolated interaction with a piece of technology is still touched by so many different people and social interactions. Okay. All right, last-ish one. So my last findings and discussions chapter is institutionalized voice assistant interaction. So I recognize that the home itself is an institution in that rules and social conventions are produced. I do talk about that more in the last chapter, but here I do speak more grandly about institutions that are global, such as Amazon, Apple, etc., that create their own branding. So one thing that I observed and I map is how people are learning to use voice assistants and learn about them from avenues that are institutionally informed, whether that's, the voice assistant actually speaking and recommending skills, or getting an email list, or getting recommendations on the app. A lot of this was based on sharing what's a new skill, what they think will be relevant, what's trending, what's popular. But compared to these organically informed sharings of learnings, people could see or learn about the full interaction. They could learn about the failed interactions. They could learn about the meaningful interactions. So it's quite powerful in how maybe designers can look at different ways people learn about devices and learn how to use them. Because in this chapter, what I explore is that relationship between the designer and the end user. What I also do in this is just map different areas of how past relationships with these brands and companies affect current use of voice assistants, whether that's reputation, what brands are known for. Like Hugo here is talking about answering his daughter's questions. I need Google for that more than Alexa. Or what they like or prefer about their personalities of their voice assistants. Apparently Google Home strokes are better. And map that in a way that shows the significance of our relationships with brands and how much they impact how we use, understand, and perceive voice assistants. And then I wrap up my thesis in the conclusion, where I discuss how I've contributed new knowledge. So in a big summary, I think I present a paradigm for understanding any artificial intelligence, that where conversation is the main interface, and that lives in our real environments, an embodied physical device. So even in the future, this could maybe include any robot that uses conversational AI. Through this ethnography, where I've collected and answered this blue sky question, I presented kind of two avenues of understanding technology from a more social lens, which is to analyze the environment of the interactions through space, place, fields, and ecosystems, and then to analyze the people in and outside of these environments through their relationships with co-users, brands, and algorithms. So my research has been at this nexus where, you know, over the last couple of years, I have been working in professional industry jobs where I've been building chatbots, being a data analyst and designing things. So this has really been intermerged with where my research practice comes from. I think that's a bit rare in a PhD to be able to have that mix. And lastly, just for some admin, where I plan to be going with this. So I do plan to submit the final thesis end of January or beginning March, and we'll do have some leeway if anything needs to happen. And thank you. I'll just invite everyone, I think I'll invite Bhuva to speak again and she can do the instructions. But seriously, thank you everyone for all your support on my journey. And please keep in touch. Okay. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Indra. Can you stop sharing? Oh, yes, that's great. Thank you so much, Indra, for a lovely presentation. First, I'll invite the panel members to comment and then open up to the audience. And thanks for keeping your time so well too. Thanks. Shall I invite Anna Marie first because it's really late for her? And
no worries, I will stay on anyway. But
yeah,
it's not that I need to go or go anywhere anymore. But I'm happy to start. Thank you so much, Indra. And I've been reading through your summary as well and your chapters as well, and I've been learning something new about this field too. I quite liked your perspective from the perspective of field, space, and place to analyze this, and then get all those insights in the physical interactions that other people may overlook. Okay, I have a couple of questions.
Good.
Maybe let's start with one of them. I think in your summary or in your chapters you mentioned also the user's mental model of the device.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples where you think like, hey, their mental model of the participants did not match with the model of the system?
Definitely. So everyone listening, what I do in the big findings discussion chapter, in the discussion I kind of link to different literature, and one thing I do link is mental models, because obviously I present a different mental model of how they interact that is a bit more physical, and I don't, because I am kind of taking things from different interviews, I kind of produce this, so I didn't directly ask like, how do you think the system works or anything like that, but there's definitely, they offer that information. And in my original coding, I'm like, this sounds like a conspiracy theory of how this device works, and I have written a few of them in this chapter, and some of them were really quite absurd. So I was able to compare, is this how the device actually works? Like, people said, when I look at it, that's when I know the interaction is going to work, because it knows that I'm looking at it and I want it to listen. Or when I speak, the one closest to me works better. And in my own research, I do look at all the developer documentation And I could confirm, like, there is, you know, microphone algorithms that do pick up the closer audio, or there is maybe like so some of them were confirmed, some of the mental models were true, but this is on part of my work where I do look at the Amazon and Google developer documentation and link them. As you saw in the chapter, I do present that table which talks about microphone range, and you know, it's 9 meters it can listen to. That's all the specs from Amazon, which I think is also unique about my thesis, as I bring that in.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, thank you. So basically what I observed indeed were a couple of interesting quotes from your participants as well. And I was thinking, like, are you aware of actually how interesting that is? And whether you actually highlight it in any of your conclusions as well. But if you are aware of that, that's great. Let me see what else I wanted to mention. Maybe more of an interesting question as well. And I know that this is also a question that Gail and I came across in the past. I think you described at some point the process of actually how people form a command, right? So like they may have a thought, they may then have an intention, they may then actually verbalize that intention for basically the machine, for the device. It may not, yeah, I'm just wondering, do you feel like what people think, are those intentions, do they have that verbalized, or is that actually a cognitive effort for these people? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or whether you understand what I'm talking about. But basically, like, are thoughts verbal? And if not, like, did you notice that in any of your research as well as an issue?
Yes, I totally know where you're coming from. If everyone recalls that process map that I had, and it highlighted some that were more like physically based, I think I did kind of focus on those. I did leave out more of the cognitive processes that people go into before the interaction. There is some stuff I left out of this chapter draft because I just wanted it done, but there's some things in there where I do talk about that bit where they're putting together that utterance. And especially because it is spoken, there's so many opportunities for mistake, and then you have to wait and then redo the interaction. So I could definitely expand on those steps that I did not focus on, but definitely putting together the sentence is part of that process. And even the preamble of maybe asking someone, what sentence have you used before? What do I say again? There is such a big barrier to the interactions through that. So that's definitely something I will expand on. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
No, it is fine, but it depends a little bit what you can also decide, like, what is the scope of my thesis, right? So like, if that is not the scope of your thesis, it's just an interesting thought. So that's totally up to you. But I did notice a few comments from you, and that I thought, like, okay, that is an interesting point from my perspective, and perhaps also from the list perspective in terms of the basically the information gap that people have in terms of are we able to verbalize what we actually are looking for, you may have observed that here as well. Actually, no, they may not be able to verbalize what they actually are looking for in this case as well, because it's such a concept from the list domain as well.
I will talk about that in a bit more. I have a section on conversational information behaviors, which will look at, you know, the gap and how they verbalize to get there.
Oh yeah. Sounds interesting.
She has one section on formulating the question you know, how people
Okay, yeah.
formulate.
Well, basically, that belongs to that section then.
Yeah, formulating questions in
Um,
laboratory.
I have more comments, but it's mostly textual, like about the things that I read, so I can communicate it later to you.
Thank you.
The last one before we go to the next panel member, you were asking about journals, and I just wanted to check whether you are aware of the journal Memory, Mind, Media.
I shall put it down.
Okay, I can text it later to you.
Yes, please.
But it's not very old yet. It's only a few years old, but it fits this topic very well, I think.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
Thank you, Anna Marie. I'll I'll open up to Baki and Gail. Gail, actually, Baki, you've been quite a lot of involved in the supervision, and Gail, let's give Gail a chance to have an input first, if it's okay. Gail?
Okay, thank you, Indra, for that. That was a really interesting presentation, very, very clear as to what your pathway is, what you're doing. So I think that's great. I think in a way, the area that I'm really interested in, because it's such a dynamic area and you're coming to the end and bringing this thesis together in a technology, in a way of engaging, experience engagement that is shifting as you're writing. And I think that's a really interesting aspect. I'm interested in the work that you've done over the last 3 years, the extent to which your engagement, your experience, as you're doing also ethnography, I think this is relevant, has shifted because of the people you're working with, and their engagement has shifted because of their engagement in the research. And I think if you've got any observations about that, I think that is something I've been very interested to know of.
Yeah, I think I've definitely thought about this. I think even in the chapter, you read about an ex-boyfriend. So that already is a demonstration of how you follow my life over the last 4 years, you know, from living with out of home. Sorry, this is hit a personal mark here, Gail. Living out of home, you know, moving back home. I definitely talk about how people I've lived with have increased their use, how they watched me do things, what questions they asked me, because I'm kind of like the expert, which a lot of my participants were as well. They were the people who brought the devices into their homes. They were usually the go-to person, which I'll talk about that more in the next findings chapter. But definitely some observations. Like there's this story I have where I heard my sister and my mum using Alexa in the next room without me, the expert. So it had really shown me that they had taken some authority in their own learning of how to use it and not just delegating to me. And I will write about that in the, I have written about that, sorry, in the chapter 6, where I talk about more people and their relationships. So it's definitely been a worthwhile research method in talking about how people learn, use, and their beliefs towards this device. And especially coming up to now where people are more and more comfortable with AI and generative AI, people are more comfortable, I think, in using this. And especially during COVID as well, where we were stuck in our houses, and a lot of this, a lot of the domestic relationships, I had a lot of stories from people from their COVID times because they're kind of pressure cooked into this one environment. So they did see a lot more interactions happening, because when we're out of home, we don't use our voice assistants. They're not in our offices yet, but this could definitely even help inform what that might look like too in an office environment or other environments than the home. So yeah, it's been really, really worthwhile, and it's been worthwhile being a long study too. You really can't get this same thing in like a year's worth of time. So I'm really happy that I pursued that angle, and I hope that comes through in any publishing that I do
Yeah.
in the next years.
I think that there are more questions around that, but I won't actually dive into those questions now, because I think in a sense you've answered it. And it really is interesting in that contribution to knowledge that you're doing, is being at that cusp of that shift from probably to a more, you start off with the anthropomorphic, but now it is really an emotional investment that people are making. And I think we're starting to see that. Certainly it's there in the writing. So thank you and well done.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Gail. Baki, we still have time.
Thanks, Bhuva. Thanks, Indra, for the very nice and interesting presentation. I'll only ask one question, so maybe we can get a few from the audience. So based on your findings, do you think there is a mismatch between the design of voice assistants and how people use them, or what they need?
Yes. Well, I think part of my research is acknowledging, yes, there is, but it's also acknowledging how wonderful humans are at making a shit thing work. Work for them. And that's what I really like about this study. It's more about the people. And you can see that they make it work for them in different ways. Maybe it only fulfills some needs. And then you get really technical people who do go into creating whole ecosystems of lights and things and give that to other people in their house. So I didn't really ask what the other people in the house wanted from this. I guess they kind of sometimes didn't want it, but sometimes just forced to have this in their home. But definitely the participants I did talk to talked about, having a sense of living in the future, of having this technology where it make their life easier, but also on a personal level. I think, which is through the talking and the conversations they can have. But it's still, you saw my number, 4.2 billion devices, but I don't think that's a true representation of how many of them are used regularly, and if there are more things we could do with this type of technology. And I think I don't know if this is a blowout, but the first example in popular culture of an AI living with people, alongside people. So this is the first iteration of that. Of course, there's going to be many things that are mismatched, because of course everyone's going to have different expectations too, which is difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Baki. But yeah, let's open it to our guests.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
We still have time.
Yeah, we got like 10 minutes. Any strange thoughts that comes to your head?
I've got a thought, Indra. This is Patrick. Hi.
Hi, Patrick. How are you?
Hi, Bhuva too. Right at the start of your presentation, Indra, and thanks very much for it. It was really interesting and fabulous. You talked about it not having yet been ChatGPT'd or large language modeled. And I was intrigued by that. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that might make changes to the way people interact, or just the way the AI works with people when that, or if that does happen, or people have a choice of different types of AI, ChatGPT'd or not.
That's so true. That's such a great question. It's such a big question, I guess. I'm sure everyone here has their own imaginations of what that would look like. But there are skills. So voice assistant skill you can open and it will connect to ChatGPT. I have not tried it, I'm sorry. But again, that comes into, I think we've all talked to ChatGPT too, and you know how complex it is and so long. So I think even in a voice format, it's not effective the way it is right now for the browser model. But if it were to be perhaps simplified, we could get more of that movie-like intelligence that we're used to seeing, whether that's from 2000 Space Odyssey or Iron Man, where we get that true assistant like person. So yeah, but I think whatever comes, my research is great in that better understanding the context, the environment, the people in the household. That's all things that the generative AI would need to know as a data point before it starts talking. So that would need to be into its model of how it understands which house it's in. I guess, yes, that's all I'll say. Come on, it's all just speculation, isn't it? But yeah, I think it would have to be quite specified for it, for a voice assistant device, considering space, place, and all those other things. It can't just be how it is right now on ChatGPT.
Thanks, Indra.
Thanks, Patrick.
Any other comments, questions, anybody?
Yeah, I have a question for Indra.
Hi, Ami.
Hey, Indra. So let me first thank you for this interesting presentation. It was inspiring and it was very informative. So thank you so much. You are a good storyteller.
Thank you.
Okay, so during your presentation, you started to talk about all the benefits for voice assistant, but I would like you to talk about the drawbacks for it. Like, for example, do you think that many people will be dependent on this technology and this might create some mental health issues? They will be more isolated, they will feel more lonely. And also, I would like you to reflect on the idea that if they will depend on this information they get from voice assistant, do you think that somehow they can affect the mainstream and share certain ideas? And that's why they will somehow impose a certain point of view on everyone. And that's why somehow they will be biased and affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mi. I guess 2 questions there. The first one, what was the first one again?
Okay, it's about the negative impact of using virtual assistants.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I can't really comment on, I did ask people, you know, their relationship to it and what they thought of it. And there was still a lot of barriers of, this is a device, this is a system. Yes, sometimes I give it pronouns, sometimes I tell it personal things-ish. But I think it's not at that level of other chatbots programs where it is personal. I don't know if anyone's used replica.ai. I think that's the most popular case example of a chatbot where people are forming relationships with. I've seen they've been getting married to them as well. So I don't think that applies to voice assistants. But sure, if replica was in a physical device in the house, could be different. But also replica has that sense of you're messaging someone, you're calling someone on the phone, where that sense is kind of different when you have this non-human looking device, and it's not mixed with those modes of communication. So I did see some instances of people automating maybe some parts of relationships they had with other people. I tell this story of Mark, who is telling his Siri, can you wake me up tomorrow at 8:30? And then his mum overhears him in the hallway. This is where space place comes in again. And she says, oh, I can wake you up tomorrow. He's like, oh, don't worry, Mum, my Siri's going to wake me. Oh, he didn't say that. But I can see some instances where automation maybe replaces some domestic stuff, as it already has in, you know, industry, where it's replaced a lot of workers. So that's definitely observed in my thesis. Second one, knowledge production. And I guess this comes into people's digital literacy and their ability to critically analyze what they read or see or think. well, there was definitely some instances where the voice assistant would be like a fact checker. Two people having an argument with each other, they're like, okay, let's ask Google. And that goes back into that section of institutionalized interaction, where the Google is this institution with a great reputation of being knowledge and giving you the right information. So Google was their decider of who was right. But I think if it's in one-to-one, one person with a voice assistant, there's always the same, maybe different version of steps where you fact check the information, but people always maybe go back to their phone or their laptop to analyze different sources of information, because with voice assistants they give you one source, and they usually quote that source, usually Wikipedia, not sure. So with all that pieces of information, I didn't ask too much of how they fact check, but there's definitely more research that we could do there to see how people fact check truth from their voice assistant. Thanks, Mia. I hope that
Thank you,
answered.
Indra. I think Zoom is going to cut us off in 2 minutes because the UTS Zoom only allows for, I think, 4 sessions simultaneously at one time with one organizer, who's Lenka. So thank you so much, Indra, for a wonderful presentation. And you've come a long way from where you were 10 years ago as an undergraduate student at UTS.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everyone.